Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It is a great honor and thrill to have Sue Lloyd with us to talk about La Princesse Lointaine, or The Faraway Princess, if you have to read it in English, as I do. Sue, most of you probably know, but I will remind you, is the author of The Man Who Was Cyrano and Edmond Rostand scholar and aficionado and passionate adorer. So it is a real treat to have her and her perspective on this play, which will be a new one to me. I've never studied this play before, so it's my first time around like the rest of you. And I did put in the chat a link to her website where she sells that biography, which I cannot recommend highly enough, and other works that she's produced too, like a copy of Chanticleer with her footnotes and many other treasures. So, Sue, thank you for being with us. And I think you want to get us started with an introduction to this play.
Right. Well, thank you, Lisa. It's a great pleasure to be with you again and reading another Rostand play, which I don't know if anyone has managed to read it in the French, but the English might have put you off a bit. It is very old-fashioned English, whereas Rostand's French was very straightforward. It was in verse, but it was very straightforward. So I hope that won't cause us any difficulties. It's very handy that the translation is on Google, so I've got mine handy here as well, so we can refer to that. But I've also got the French edition because some of the poetry is just so beautiful. This was only Rostand's second performed play. He'd won a prize for his first play, which was Les Romanesques, which I think you call the Fantastics, do you?
Or the Romantics.
The Romantics, that's right, yes. And that was put on at Comédie Française. So he now had a bit more confidence to do the kind of play he wanted now. That Romantics is a very light-hearted play, really rather great fun to read. And La Princesse Lointaine, the Far Princess, I'm not sure what the English thing, yeah, the Princess Far Away, that's right, is quite different because in this play, Rostand is able to give voice to some of his deepest feelings and commitments. And you will find that the priest, who is described as not terribly priestly by one of the other, and of course with the comment that he will soon be excommunicated because he's not really enough of an Orthodox priest. He is the spokesperson for a lot of Rostand's ideas about the importance of having a vision, having something you're enthusiastic about in life. He calls it le rêve. In English, that's usually translated as the dream. And this play is a sort of dream in itself, really. Don't expect it to be too realistic. On the other hand, the psychology is very good. And you will see the action can be quite exciting in places. So he's always wanted to be a writer for poetry, for the theatre. But writing verse comes to him very naturally. And so he always writes his plays in verse, including this one. And in French, it just flows off the tongue. In Mrs. Henderson Norman's English, it's a little bit stilted, but we'll have to cope with that. So the great star of the time, the great female star of the time was, of course, Sarah Bernhardt, who I'm sure you've heard of. I do hope you have. She was a very big star indeed. She had been famous in she studied at the Comédie Française, so she knew how to speak verse. And she was famous for her roles in Racine and in other classical plays, such as Phèdre. I mean, she was considered the Phèdre of the time. So she knew how to speak verse. She had great training. She had great presence. She was a real character, actually, Sarah Bernhardt. I mean, she had a pet. Was it a cheetah? I can't remember, but, quite an interesting person. She had her coffin made, so she went to sleep in it occasionally. She was quite an original person, but she was also a great actress. So after she left the Comédie Française, she starred in lots of plays by Victorien Sardou, as, in fact, often as a princess. So this was not going to be new to her, to be a princess. Now she was in her 50s. She was looking for something a bit more thoughtful, a little bit more serious. She wanted something, more that she could get her teeth into rather than some melodramatic historical thing. So when Rostand approached her with his idea for La Princesse Lointaine, she was delighted. And she immediately said, yes, let's use my theatre, La Renaissance, and we'll put it on, and I would love to star in this wonderful play. I mean, there's quite a funny anecdote about how she was told about the play. Rostand called on her just as she was leaving for America and had to sit down on a packing case and read it through to her. And she wanted to listen. And he found his own play so moving. He broke into tears at one point and was very embarrassed to find he had no handkerchief. So Sarah Bernhardt found him a handkerchief and they carried on. And the upshot was that she wanted to do this play, which is in 4 acts. 2 of them are on board ship and 2 are in the palace of the faraway princess. What else do I need to say about this? I mean, is there anything you want to ask me about this? Just as we're starting, or should we get into the first thing?
Well, one thing I wanted to remind everyone is that we're discussing just Act 1. That's what I've given as an assignment. So some people may have been impatient and read the whole thing, but we want to confine our analysis to just Act 1 so that we're all talking about the same thing. And I think you answered all the questions I had, which included, what do you think of the translation? So I'll be interested to hear of any differences if there are any you want to give as examples. And also, I think it would be lovely to hear the original French if there are a few lines you want to pick out as kind of representative of the sound and flow of the language in the play. I just completed my translation of Un soir à Hernani, and my French translation partner recorded the entirety of it for me in French.
Oh, wow.
And that almost put an end to the project because after I heard him say it, and he is a remarkable reciter of poetry, after I heard it in French from him, the translation seemed wholly inadequate, but I've made peace with it.
I must say that what I've read of your translation is really good.
Thank you. And I think it's improved even since I sent you a draft. So it will be passable, but we can't pretend that it has any real resemblance to the original because it's just not possible, I don't think. So yeah, should we start by did anybody else have questions about the context for the play?
Should I explain really about the medieval idea of distant love?
Sure.
This was in the Middle Ages, and there was this sort of idea of courtly love where you paid tribute, in verse if possible, to a beautiful woman without any expectations of a relationship with her. And that's what's happening here. And this was particularly, the poets who did this were often called troubadours, and they came from Rostand's native Provence. He was born in Marseille. He was very familiar with this romance idea of the troubadours writing poetry to praise women that usually they had seen. And now in this case, Rudel is praising a woman who he has never seen. He's basing all this, as we learn in Act 1, he's basing his devotion to her on simple reports from pilgrims who've been on their way to the Holy Land, because this is the time of the Crusades. And he's based all this poetry on this faraway princess whom he really has never seen. and this was an extension really of a normal role of a troubadour, but Rudel took it very seriously, and Rudel was actually a real life troubadour. He actually existed. He was a troubadour in the medieval times, and he did write poems to a far princess, but not any princess in particular. This is an invention of Rostand's. And his friend Bertrand d'Alamont, who we also meet in Act 1, who has come with him, who shares his vision and supports him in every way he can. He too is a troubadour poet. And that's all we need to know about him at the moment, but he will play a very important part in the play. The third character, Melisande, we don't meet until Act 2. So until then, we have to content ourselves with what we read and hear in Act 1. We will find her. I think that...
So I have a question about that. So to audiences of the time, the quest that they're on would not be wholly unfamiliar. This would be something that they understood as a practice, but at the same time, it's described within the context of the first play as kind of insane and as him doing something very extreme and that's called into question by a number of the characters. So is Rostand kind of taking this practice, and he's obviously making it metaphorical, so I guess that's one aspect of it, but is he taking a practice they would be familiar with and giving it this metaphorical meaning, or is he making it something altogether different from the one that they would have known?
People would have been familiar with the idea of the medieval troubadour and the platonic love that they sing about. They would have done, and in fact, there'd been recently in a very well-read paper an article by someone called Gaston Paris, who actually told the story of Rudel. So it wouldn't have been entirely unfamiliar. And as I've said, Sarah often did portray princesses of one kind or another. It would have been, I think, what would have puzzled audiences perhaps were the philosophical ideas that Rostand drew from it. Yes, which we will discover for ourselves soon.
But it's his spin on an interpretation of this practice that makes it his.
Yes, he's using it as a way of expressing his own visions for life. He was so fed up with his own times. He thought, well, heaven knows what he'd make of ours. He thought they were cynical and materialistic, and just was so shocked and wanted to inspire particularly his countrymen and women, the French, with a sort of renewal of the Gallic spirit, which had stood them in good stead for so long. And of course, he brings that back very much in Cyrano de Bergerac. If you've read Cyrano or love Cyrano, this is a very different play. This is a very different play. It's much more a play of ideas, but being by Rostand, it's also very good theatre. We'll discover, yes.
And interestingly, one of my notes is a list of similarities to Cyrano de Bergerac, but I'm sure it's different, but there are some parallels that are just parallels of Rostand's soul, I think. Yeah. Quickly, I just want to mention Guinevere. She mentioned that she had a difficult time finding the book. Just so you know, in the email, there is a link to the book online. I know there are many people who just simply cannot read something on a computer or device, and I sympathize with that entirely. But it is there if you couldn't get that link to work. Odd. Okay, well, I'll try to see what I can do to make that more accessible to you. But there is an Amazon reprint of this translation, so I hope it'll get to you soon. So did you, Sue, have a sequence of points you want to discuss, or I have some questions for you too?
I'd like to hear your questions, Lisa, and see what comes
from. So the basic scenario here is, and I'm going to have Tell me how to pronounce the characters' names, because there's a French pronunciation, there's an English pronunciation, and we'll just have to decide on what we're going to call them. So the main character, what would you call him?
Oh, Rudel.
Rudel. Okay. And first name? Geoffroy.
Rudel.
Okay. Rudel has heard tell of Melisande and is dying. He is dying, correct?
Rudel is dying. He is aware he is dying.
Yes.
And he would like to see, in fact, he's determined to try and see his faraway princess before he dies. This involves quite a difficult sea journey, where they might have been, in fact, they have been attacked by pirates, and it's not easy at all. But as we see from the play, he's inspired the sailors.
So they're starving, they're weary, they've been under attack, they're wounded, but they're still determined to make it to their destination. And the idea is that they were without purpose prior. I mean, there are conversations we can go over on this point, but they were without purpose before this quest, and now this has given a sense of purpose to their lives.
Yes, and it's also a sort of defense of poetry in one or two speeches, because it is poetry that inspires the sailors to keep going. And yeah.
Yes, my husband Chad finished the first act and texted me while I was at work and said, "Oh, this is wonderful, a poetry powered ship."
Oh,
good summation. So one of the things that I thought would be interesting is just to discuss the different characters' perspectives on the sensibility of this quest. So we have, and one of the ones that fascinated me the most was Bertrand, who is sympathetic, but his kind of questioning of his own motivations, or his, maybe not questioning, but analysis of his own motivations in going on the quest, was interesting. And then the priest and Erasmus has a very different perspective. And then the pilots was interesting to me too.
There's a lot of humor, isn't there? There's a lot of humor here. In some of the contrasting remarks, for instance, of the pilot, who's really worried he's lost his compass and can't find it. And the sailors rather make fun of him. But also the pilot is a very down to earth sort of person who can't understand why anyone should be excited by a princess who doesn't even, you might never see. He is a very matter of fact sort of man, and quite a contrast. Yes, and Erasmus, Erasmus is the doctor who's been torn away from what was a very comfortable life with Rudel in his chateau. All the usual sort of courtly things were going on there, and he doesn't see why he had to come and be torn away like this, and his clothes are in rags like everyone else's, but he is willing to listen to Frere Trophime. Yes.
So I noted a couple of lines. I didn't note the pilot's lines, but so the pilot, you said matter of fact. Is he meant to be sort of a Philistine character, like this poetry nonsense?
Yes, I suppose so. He obviously is not interested in poetry, and it doesn't seem to have any effect on him at all.
Okay. So whereas he just wants an actual literal compass to direct them, something scientific.
Well, at one point, yes. At one point, the sailors, after Bertrand has read them a poem, and they feel a lot better. They say, your compass wouldn't have made us feel any better, but poetry has.
Okay. And then, so the conversation with Erasmus is on page 69 and 70, or sorry, 70 is 69 is where most of it can be found. And so just to get a little bit better sense of his character, I think we can look closely at some of these lines. So one that I sort of made a list in the margin of how he comes off as skeptical of the kind of spirit behind this mission and his own kind of distinctive point of view. So he says, in the English translation, at least, Fra Trophimus is how it's here. The best one can discern is fog. And I thought that was interesting that he looks out on the horizon and sees fog, whereas they see an actual destination. So it's, I guess, too literal, or he can't see the abstract vision behind this mission. And then he's complaining a bit later, and he says, "Prince of all triflers born, why need he set forth on a quest forlorn? I joined the prince's household, but when he, gentle and feeble, yet lived tranquilly, beneath a roof, sir, not beneath a mast. I find this voyage bitter, first and last." So he enjoyed being doctor to Rudel when it meant comfort and security and being under a roof, not adventure and danger. And then he curses the whole idea that somebody sang with zeal wholly importunate about Melisande. So
this is quite a useful speech, because he's actually telling us why they're there at all. So this is Rostand giving us some information in an interesting way, really, because Erasmus is quite a character.
That's interesting. So we're learning about the journey from the character who least identifies with it, I guess.
And then we learn why Bertrand has come along as well. He was the only person who didn't think it was mad.
So let me ask you about him, because this is the line that interested me about him. It's on page 73 of the Norman translation. And it says, "My heart is weak. It has no barriers grim. A hero passes and I follow him. Were I Provençal, were I troubadour, seeing such love if I did not adore." So could I even call myself a troubadour if I weren't inspired by this kind of a quest? He says, "I never knew." Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Are we talking about Bertrand at the moment?
Yes.
Yes.
And then he says, "I never knew contentment in Provence. I ate my heart out, playing games with words, chiseled like gems or made to fly like birds. I tired of those whose gravest task was not polish a thumbnail, juggle with a thought. Some use at last my light life may evince." So it sounds like he was a troubadour, but felt like his poetry was contrived or hollow prior to this.
What he wanted is a good reason for writing poetry. He was just writing it. He was as best he could, really, because he was a poet. But what he lacked was some ideal to work for, something that would inspire him and therefore inspire other poets. And he keeps talking himself a poet. He repeats that several times. "I am a poet. I'm a poet." And he says, that's right. He wanted something to inspire him, didn't he? That's right. But he does admit that he's a bit of a mixed up kid, really. He's that's a very old expression, isn't it? But that's what he is. He claims because he's a poet, he's rather impulsive. And this was an impulse. You know, he thought, "Oh, what a wonderful adventure. Oh, I must support Rudel in this. This is really bright. This is really brilliant." And he still thinks so. He still thinks so, doesn't he? But he does say, and we must remember this later in the play, he does say he is rather a moody person. He does things impulsively. He's not consistent. So we need to remember that, because he says that himself about it.
That's what was so interesting to me, because at first it sounded like he was the one truly devoted to Rudel and his cause. But there's first the fact of him describing himself as impulsive. So when he's complimented by the priest, he says, capable, yes, of action, of devotion, still at the mercy of each new emotion. It frights me, Father, that I left the rest so easily for this alluring quest. And talk about the stilted language. I had to really ponder this line for a minute, but it's a great line. Less quick to good, mayhap to ill more slow. So maybe if I'm less quick to jump to something that seems good, I will also be less quick to jump to something that is not so good. Praise not the moods that toss me to and fro. And then the other line that I put a little asterisk next to was, I am a poet. All this love I show him may be but the seduction of a poem. So again, it felt at first like, oh, he's the one devoted to this quest among people who are questioning it or who are just along under his leadership. But then he says, maybe it's just the seduction of a poem that's bringing me along and not devotion to him in particular.
I don't think he knows himself, really.
Yeah. He's not a solid character, confident in his own motivations.
He does, however, he's the one who does stand up for poetry and say, you need a poet more than you need a pilot.
Yes. And he is the one who's at Rudel's side through this.
Yes, he's devoted to Rudel. He really does love him. He's a loyal friend.
Mm-hmm. So I thought we ought also to talk about the wonderful lines with the priest.
Yes, no, this is really the core of the play, really. Frere Trophine makes it clear, yes.
Yes, so let's see, where is the part?
We have to go back a bit. Page 71.
70 and 71, yes.
1771, yes, exactly.
Okay, so that entire speech is worth, and even on to 72 also. We could spend most of the rest of the time talking about this, I think, but some questions about it. So first, let's just try to get to the essence of what he tells Erasmus. So what he's being questioned about how he can call himself a priest and support this mission at the same time. This is not a mission to the Holy Sepulchre. This is a mission to a beautiful woman. So how can you call yourself a priest? And
why is he not going on the crusades like any normal Christian? Yes, and many of the lords in Provence had gone already to the crusades, of course. But here he is on this mission, just to see a woman. And Erasmus cannot understand it. Just to see a woman. So this conversation between Frere Trophine and Erasmus is very important, because this is the key to the whole idea that Rostand is trying to get across, really. And Frere Trophine keeps insisting that this mission of Rudel's, this love he has, this distant love, has been very good for Rudel. And it is a very good thing for not just for Rudel, but for everybody on board, in fact, including Bertrand, because it is inspiring. And he sort of, I mean, Erasmus says in your translation on page 70 near the bottom, Erasmus says, we seek a lady's eyes in Palestine. I mean, really, what's the point of that, he's thinking, Trophime says, well, you don't know what good will come of this. God knows more than we do. That's the idea, isn't it? Yes.
He insists, be sure the Lord has pleasure in this thing, for he does all, or so I understand, by any deed disinterested, grand, not less his own than the crusade will prove, or so I think, this beautiful pure love. So he likens their quest to the crusade.
Yes, it is for God as well. qu'il trouvera son compte à ce bel amour pur. Sorry about the accent, but that's what it is in French, that particular line. Okay. Yes.
And so the line in regard to the effect he's had on the other men, it says this is on 71, he wanted to set free his own, who lived, I've got the context wrong. I guess this is the perspective of what God wants of men. He would approve of this sort of quest because he wanted to set free his own, who lived proud, idle, drowsy, and alone, selfish, lukewarm, the slaves of circumstances, and set them splendid singing midst the lances, drunk with devotion, glad to die indeed, in self-forgetfulness, the soul's chief need. So that there he sort of captures what kind of lifestyle he's disapproving and what he regards as the ideal. So
that's right. And I'm very cross with the translation, really. I mean, in self-forgetfulness, the soul's chief need is, oh dear. I mean, the French is simply dans cet oubli de soi dont tous avaient besoin. Everyone needs to forget themselves. That's what it comes down to. And it's so much clearer in the French. But I mean, yeah, we're lucky to have a translation. Let's not grumble too much.
So the problems of society are being idle, drowsy, selfish, lukewarm. There's a line to come that says the highest virtue is enthusiasm.
Yes. And he says it twice, and I've got it up on my wall.
Oh, really?
It's very important.
Well, it's interesting because in the poem Un soir à Hernani, that the word enthusiasm comes up multiple times, and it's the same idea. And it's just fascinating to have a philosophy of life, a moral philosophy that sets enthusiasm as the highest virtue.
Well, let's examine this a bit. What he really means is enthusiasm, caring so much that you want to do something. Yes. So it's passion as well. He was very keen on passion, really caring so that it actually affects your whole life and you do something about it.
Yes.
Which is a very valuable thing. I don't know if any of you are familiar with C.S. Lewis, the English writer who wrote The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. He wrote also a book called The Screwtape Letters, and it's about a very elderly devil instructing a new young little devil how to cause evil in the world and how to tempt people. And he sets him a task to follow one man who he thinks will be easy. But when the young one reports back that this man has conceived a passion for growing onions, the older devil says, well, that's no good. You'll have to give up on him then. There's no way, if he's got a passion for something like that, you will ever distract him to do evil.
Wow.
It's a similar idea here, I think.
Yes, because it describes the transformation of Rudel. It was dead in him, gay, idle, roving. Now it wakes within him, suffering, willing, loving. And then by such means comes, I think, the important part that in a man's body beat an ardent heart. And then the last line there, which seemed very thematically important, all true love's travail serves high heaven's cause. That's the gist of his.
And that's the line that is repeated right at the end as well. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In French, it's c'est pour le ciel que les grands amours travaillent. Same idea, but of course, in the original, it packs more of a punch.
Yes. Another thing that interested me here is that, so the sailors there's a real distinction between Rudel as the leader and the sailors as the followers. And they lack, and I was just curious about your thoughts about what Rostand is saying about people here. So there's several times that it suggests they can't comprehend the meaning of the mission. They can understand it on some level that will allow them to engage in the quest with him. But in the translation, there's this term, little spirits. For mark you, little spirits love the grand and feel the force they cannot understand. This noble folly which none comprehends shines out all clear to these, his simple friends. So there's some figure in society who is the leader in terms of ennobling or inspiring or showing the way to little spirits who wouldn't be able to comprehend it on their own.
I think that's it, and the word simple is used in both, and I think Rostand's saying that people, ordinary people, who don't have much in education, perhaps, are often more able to grasp this sort of idea, and I think that's what he's getting at here. That because then he says the pilot. What about the pilot? Well, the pilot, he's not simple. He's a complicated man who's learned to guide a ship. The sailors have simple ideas. They see this as a quest for love. They have this vision of a beautiful lady that they want to see. This is what's keeping them going all the time. They're not worried about the sophisticated any sort of detail about it. It's just the big picture that they can see, and they can understand. They can understand, and they can sympathize. Yeah.
I hope that Toilers of the Sea is screaming out in people's minds right now, because for anybody who just read it with us, because there was a very similar idea in Toilers of the Sea. Have you ever read that, Sue?
No, I haven't. I must
okay.
do.
So there's a character, the main character, Gilliatt, is a sailor, and he's continually described as having this kind of, as being simple, but having this basic compass inside of him that points to the good in this kind of uncomplicated way that does make him, in a sense, more passionate than the other characters. So that's a really interesting idea, and it's different than I understood it when I read it. So I'm glad I asked you about it, because I thought of it just as, and maybe there's an element of this too, that they require someone who does understand to inspire them with it. And
yes,
that could be the role of the poet, somewhat.
Exactly, it's certainly the role of the poet here. In other cases, it might be a prophet, or someone who is an inspiring speaker, that doesn't require sophisticated understanding. He speaks directly to people's souls, and I think that's the point. You don't need an intermediary, according to Frere Trophime. No wonder he would get excommunicated if anyone knew about this, because no intermediary is necessary. The idea is that a really great dream or vision or aim goes straight to people's souls. And the less there is in between, the better. I mean, Bertrand, for instance, saying, oh dear, well, I'm not really a very good person, but I am a poet. But for the sailors, it's straight there. They get this vision. They understand it. It speaks straight to their heart. Yeah. I think that's the idea. And I think you find that in a lot of literature as well. Yes.
Yeah, that's lovely. Another question I have is this next line from Frere Trophime. So the English translation is, this is also on 72. For each ray of the ideal that enters man's soul, wrest ground from evil at its centers. Each noble aim, a nobler aim will bear. No dream gives place to any dream less fair. The heart, expanding, has more room for truth. So the idea there seems to be that this quest is is going to, there must be some gardening metaphor or something here, but it's going to nourish the rest of his soul and create, you know, a positive aim overall, not just on this single matter.
Yes, in the French, there's no garden metaphor. It's about sunshine, rays of sunshine. And so the more light that is led into the soul, the less room there is for evil. That's the idea. Yes, that's right. I mean, that is very heavily undermined in my edition as well, because that is so significant. Any good thing that comes in leaves less room for evil. That's the idea.
Well, that's very Chanticleer, isn't it? Bringing the light.
Yes, I hadn't thought of that. Yes.
The birds of the night can't thrive as long as the sun has risen.
I mean, the thing is, all Rostand's plays have similar ideas, and so they're all linked in these ways. And it's lovely that you've got things that you'll bring out later about Cyrano, because indeed, this is a foretaste of what is to come.
And you said it's his second poem too, so that's, I mean, because I saw such echoes of Cyrano in it, so you can almost see it.
Yes,
starting to develop.
Well, absolutely. Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot of ideas that will be picked up later. Yes, definitely.
You mentioned idealism versus materialism, and I've found several lines that capture that sentiment. One here at the top of 72. Fra Trophime says, enchanted and ennobled galley makes not for hire, but for a dream, this Sally. And I think there were a couple other lines like that kind of differentiating for hire from for a dream. Okay, so actually the next note in my list was the connections that occurred to me to other of his works. So the first was just the at the beginning, the very opening of the scene of the act, when it describes the mariners with tragic faces and ghastly appearances, pale, fleshless, overwhelmed with weariness and privation, and needing inspiration. And it just reminded me of the scene of the soldiers besieged in
oh, yes.
Yes. And he says throws them the Iliad to, you know, if they're hungry, feed your soul with the Iliad. And
then there's a song, he says, come and play us a song. And they're all from the same part of the country. They're all Gascon, of course. And this is a Gascon song, and they all get very homesick and forget that they're hungry and sad. And yes, it's lovely. I love that bit. That's a lovely part in Act 4, which is otherwise pretty grim, isn't it?
Right. So there's just such a parallel situation that the way they're able to survive
yes, absolutely,
troubles of this voyage is with poetry and nourishment of the soul. This one is a bit of an obscure connection, but it just struck me as so similar. On page 67, one of the sailors says, someone asks if, I forget what exactly is asked, but he says, I will see her, that is meed enough. I'm trying to find that line now. But the idea is the only reward they need is to see her and nothing more. And you know, having spent and suffered everything for that purpose is sufficient. And it just reminded me of the line in Cyrano, what a fool, and when he says, but what a gesture.
Yes. Yeah, and even better if it doesn't achieve anything. That's another part of Cyrano that he says at some point. Yes. You know, it's a wonderful gesture. It doesn't matter whether it works or not. It's worth it for its own sake, and that's the idea here. It's worth it for its own sake. Yes.
Yeah, better to have been in vain.
Yes.
And then the last is actually a connection to the poem en soi irony. It was just such a charming connection. So it's on 77. Bruno says, an illustrious voyage, Francois, so I hold. And Rudel says, ah, yes, you bear not Caesar and his gold, but Rudel and his love illustrious. And there's a line in the poem, it's just so charming. There's a scene where young Hugo and his mother traveling across Spain come across the convoy of the treasury. And so they're kind of traveling along with the convoy of the treasury. So it's protected by, hundreds of guards. And Rostand comments, they thought that they were protecting a chest full of gold. Little did they know they were protecting a boy with his soul full of stars.
Yes, that's right. That's lovely, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, so he used the same image here. There, this is better than gold. Let's see. Oh, one line I found so fascinating and so Rostand. This is the better to have lived in vain idea, I guess, but I thought it would be worth dwelling on, is on the bottom of 77. How fascinating and ironic it is to say, nothing I envy save Icarus's fate.
Yes. Very odd.
Very
I thought that was very odd. I think the point was Icarus was the one who wanted to fly the chariots of the sun. So I suppose that was rather an egoistic dream, wasn't it? I think there's a difference here, don't you?
I think so. I
was rather struck by that. It doesn't seem
what
to
he
fit
must
very
be
well,
stressing is that he had a grand ambition.
Yes.
And it just kind of being emphatic about the point that it does not matter if you succeed.
Absolutely.
If you have the grand ambition.
Yes.
So it seems maybe a little bit deliberately provoking. That's why it strikes us as odd, because we don't expect anyone to envy Icarus's fate.
It's probably the last line that matters, isn't it? The love that brought so beautiful a death. I mean, this is a very romantic attitude, really, but it works in this play, definitely. Yes. So I mean, we've really got the gist of everything now. We know why they're there. We know what they're aiming for, and we know who the characters are. And then there are moments of drama. We've had some humor as well. Then there are moments of drama, aren't there? They just all almost fed up and giving up. And then someone shouts land, and everyone revives. Even Rodel tries to stand up. I'm not sure he can spring up, but he certainly tries to sit up straighter. And then the description of what they can see, I mean. And then disappointment, because the poet is too ill to move. You can't move him. He has to stay on the ship, and this is where Bertrand offers to go, and it's all very positive. He is determined to bring the princess back, come what may. He will do it. Yes. And so we end on a fairly hopeful note.
One idea I wanted to explore a little more, that so the statement interested me, and then it got me thinking about what it means practically. So this was Rudel on 78. He says, nay, to a heart, it's kind of following up on the Icarus idea, but he says, nay, to a heart impatient, nobly planned, that is not love, which lies too close at hand. I don't know if that very closely resembles the French. I imagine it at least captures the idea. So, what does it mean to say that is not love? It relates to the better for it to have been in vain, which I think is easy to misinterpret also, because it doesn't mean literally you want none of your quests to succeed if you're a noble person. That can't be it. But it's kind of,
sometimes you get into movies,
sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I don't know if that was, if anybody who wants to make a comment, please unmute yourself and feel free to do so, but I wasn't sure if that was just background noise.
Yes,
so
the line you're thinking of is the one just before he says his poem, his first poem.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
This is above that, yeah. In his very first lines, when he's about to recite his first poem, he says, "That is not love which lies too close at hand."
Yes, yes.
So
that's right.
You need a grand, abstract, distant vision to give your life purpose. If you're just seeking rewards that lie close at hand, that's never going to bring true fulfillment. And I thought of that in connection to that opening line where Erasmus, from the very beginning, where Erasmus sees only fog in the distance. And the idea is, if you're only able to see fog in the distance and you're only able to seek reward in what's immediately around you and easily fulfilled, then you're never going to find true spiritual satisfaction.
Yes, yes, I think so. I mean, he's it's what he's saying partly, and I find this quite difficult to understand, that is not love that lies so too close at hand. On ne peut plus aimer ce que l'on connaît trop. So it's partly her foreignness and her unavailability that matters. Is that what you were getting at, Lisa? I rather lost it because I was looking for the page.
Oh, that's okay. So I think the idea, and it's one that resonates very deeply with me, is that, especially, I'll make it kind of trivial and then we can turn it back into something grand. My kids, if they want to find, satisfaction in their day, the first impulse is going to be to grab their iPad and watch a YouTube video. It's very short. It's very immediately accessible. It's very directly fulfilling. It's not ultimately satisfying to them. It's not the kind of deep satisfaction that they're going to get from something they've worked at, loved, been passionate about, that's been kind of an overarching, my daughter does gymnastics and it's a 10-hour-a-week commitment, and she has, competitions that are kind of the culmination. And so there are these things that are more principled devotions that cover a great deal more of life and that mean ultimately a great deal more to us. And those are not going to be close at hand. Those are going to be defining kind of distant purpose and passion.
Yes.
And those are the ones that really matter.
Yes, I see what you're getting at, that it's a sort of ambition for the future, which of course is something to aim at. It's the same idea of aiming at something higher and better than you can get in ordinary life. It's the same idea, I think.
Yeah, so it's about a vision for the future that's guiding the present. So it's long range. It's grander in scope. So it's going to be more all-encompassing and ultimately more fulfilling for that reason.
Yeah.
And then the challenge of it is that it takes thoughtfulness and will to remain committed to that vision, because it is fog. I mean, Erasmus is right in a sense. It is fog. It's hard to see. So that's why you have to be so intent on seeing the vision beyond the fog.
Yes, and at one stage, even Rudel begins to lose faith. Right towards the end of the act, he is exhausted and he's not sure, whether he will actually achieve what he's set out to do. And then I think that something happens then, is that when they shout land and he is revived. Yes, that's right. Yeah, so it's there are so many ideas in this play, really. But I think we've gathered most of the important ones, don't you?
Yes, I think so. Let's see, did I have any last? Have you ever seen this performed? I wanted to ask you.
No, it's never performed. In fact, Sarah Bernhardt didn't revive it very much. It did not have I can tell you about the reception maybe at the end of the play when but it was a purely reception of its time.
Okay.
The audience loved it,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the spectacle. I mean, really, just reading it, you have to visualize the dramatic scene of this poor ship, totally battered, and everyone, you know, a terrible thing. And the only thing that keeps them going is this vision. And then, of course, we actually will see the palace in the next act. So it is quite spectacular. It must have been very spectacular, I think, on scene.
Did he, he spent 10 years staging, coming up with the costuming and staging for Chanticleer. Was there anything similar? Was he involved in the set designs and such? Do you know?
Oh, Sarah loved, I mean, yes, Rostand always wanted to be involved. He was always keen on that. He was a man of the theatre. But Sarah Bernard was very much a woman who had her own ideas, and it was her theatre. So she wanted it absolutely splendid. They did discover that the stage wasn't really big enough to give full play to the grandeur that she had envisaged. So Rostand did write one expanded one. The idea was he would write another more expanded one for her next theatre, which was much bigger, but unfortunately it never got performed.
Okay.
But to people who know Rostand's work, it is a very significant play. It is worth reading.
Well, I'm delighted to be reading it. Thank you, Sue. I think we'll assign Act 2 for next week. And I hope people are able, if Guinevere, if you still have trouble, reach out to me and I will find it for you. And we will meet again next Sunday at 8:00. Any last questions before or comments or thoughts or reactions?
I have one question. I always had the understanding that when you're doing a translation, and if it rhymes, you have to sometimes get rid of the rhyme and keep the meaning. Is that lost here? Did they try to rhyme and lose some of the meaning?
I think the meaning is there, but the language to us is rather old-fashioned. It does need a modern translation. I have a friend who's done a German translation. If anyone wants to read that, they're very welcome. It is a verse translation. I mean, I don't know whether any of the other translations are in simpler English. I mean, the thing is, this is in simple French. It is simple. There's no sort of old-fashioned thee and thou or twas or anything. But of course, when Mrs. Henderson Dangerfield Norman, what a mouthful, was writing this, she was writing of her time. It was how people wrote poetry in her time. She did want to rhyme it. So, you know, we just have to take the meaning and try and read some of the French at least. It's easy to get a French copy and just have the English next to you, and then you'd get a lot more out of it, I think, if you had the English there and the French next to it. You could probably guess an awful lot of it, and you could feel the movement, the verse flowing very beautifully. The things he did with Alexandrines are amazing, yes.
I suspect in her trying to translate it in rhyme, it's often the syntax of the sentences that trips us up.
Yes. I mean, I think Stefan has a very good point here. If you're trying to rhyme it, something gets lost, really. Blank verses is much more suitable for Rostand, I think, yes. Or even not verse at all, yeah. But sometimes blank verse works very well usually, yes.
Thank you.
All
right. Well, thank you everybody for being here, and I'm looking forward to the next installment next week. See you then.
And so am I.
Okay. See you then. Have a nice week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you.
Will the recording be available? Yen had to leave early.
Yes, it will. Yeah, I'll send that out soon. Okay, bye.
Thank you.